In the late 1970s, nearly 3 out of 4 Americans trusted the news. So much so, the nightly broadcast felt like a civic ritual shared by millions. Today, trust is barely half that, even though access and choice have exploded. If more information was supposed to unite us, why did it tear our faith in facts apart? The answer begins with a single appointment each night, and what happened when that unity vanished. Every evening in the 1970s, as dinner plates clattered and living rooms filled, millions of Americans gathered around their television sets for a single shared appointment. At precisely the same time, families from Maine to California tuned in to one of only 3 national broadcasts: ABC, NBC, or CBS. The country paused for 30 minutes, united by the ritual of the evening news. On a typical night, between 35 million and 50 million people watched one of these newscasts. Walter Cronkite, seated behind the CBS evening news desk, became more than a familiar face. He was a fixture in American homes. His steady cadence, calm authority, and signature sign-off, and that's the way it is, offered a sense of certainty that stretched from coast to coast. Nielsen ratings show that Cronkite's broadcast alone often drew more than 20 million viewers, representing about a quarter to a third of all TV sets in use at that hour. In many households, the evening news was not just background noise, it was a daily ritual, woven into the fabric of American life. There were no remote controls to surf past the news, no digital video recorders to catch it later, and no national newspapers with the reach of television. For most, the choice was simple: watch the news or miss out on the day's events entirely. This collective experience gave anchors like Cronkite a rare kind of authority. Polls from the early 1970s named him the most trusted man in America, outpacing even presidents and public officials. His reputation was built on a foundation of fact-based reporting and restraint. Cronkite rarely offered personal opinions, and when he did, such as his somber analysis of the Vietnam War after the Tet Offensive, it was delivered with careful deliberation following extensive on-the-ground reporting. That moment, when he concluded the war was mired in stalemate, carried enormous weight precisely because it was so unusual. Even President Lyndon Johnson reportedly remarked, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." In an era with just 3 channels and 1 main news appointment each night, trust in the news was not an abstraction. It was a lived, nightly experience, anchored by the steady presence of an anchor whose word felt like common ground. The unity of that ritual would not last, but for a time it defined what it meant to be informed in America. Inside the network newsrooms of the 1960s and the 1970s, every second of airtime was precious. The evening newscast ran just 30 minutes, with only 22 to 24 minutes reserved for actual reporting after commercials. Producers faced a simple but unyielding math problem. Too many stories, not enough time. This scarcity forced teams to act as strict gatekeepers, weighing each headline and segment with care. The result was a relentless focus on what could be verified, what truly mattered, and what would stand up to public scrutiny. Behind the scenes, newsroom culture revolved around a clear mantra: better boring than wrong. Producers and editors, often veterans of print journalism, drilled this lesson into young reporters. Rumor and speculation rarely made it past the assignment desk. Stories that could not be double-sourced were set aside, no matter how tempting the scoop. The pressure to fill airtime with facts, not opinions, shaped every editorial meeting. In that world, a mistake was not just a personal embarrassment. It could risk the network's reputation and even its license. Federal regulations reinforced this discipline. The FCC required broadcasters to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity as a condition of keeping their spot on the dial. The Fairness Doctrine demanded that controversial issues be presented with contrasting viewpoints, discouraging overt editorializing or partisan slant. License renewals came up every few years, and networks knew that a pattern of biased or careless reporting could draw complaints, hearings, or even the threat of losing their broadcast rights. This tight framework shaped not just what stories were told, but how they were told. News producers operated less like solo artists and more like stewards of a public trust, working within a system that rewarded caution and consensus. The evening rundown resembled a program clock, a handful of top stories, a brief international segment, weather, and a closing feature. Every minute was accounted for, and every decision was filtered through the lens of public responsibility. Within these boundaries, trust was not an accident. It was the product of institutional routines, regulatory expectations, and the daily discipline of saying no to anything that could not be proven. The limits of time and mandate did not just constrain the news, they built its credibility. On June 1, 1980, a new channel quietly flickered to life on cable systems across the country. CNN, founded by Ted Turner, offered something no one had ever seen before: news all day and all night, every day of the year. For decades, the boundaries of television news had been set by the clock: 30 minutes each evening, 3 networks, 1 national conversation. Turner's vision broke that spell. Now, for the first time, Americans could tune in for headlines at dawn, updates at noon, or live coverage at midnight. Scarcity vanished overnight. Inside CNN headquarters in Atlanta, the challenge was immediate and daunting. The newsroom had to fill 24 hours, not just a single half-hour slot. Turner and his first news director, Reese Schonfeld, devised a wheel format, a rotating schedule of headline summaries, weather, business, awards, sports, and specialized segments, all updated every 30 minutes. The news wheel kept the channel in constant motion, promising viewers that the latest developments were never more than a few minutes away. Skeptics wondered if there was enough real news to justify this experiment. Early staffers scrambled to produce fresh stories, often relying on live feeds, phone interviews, and repeated segments to keep the wheels spinning through the night. Field reporting and foreign bureaus were expensive luxuries. Most hours, especially after midnight, were patched together with replays and low-budget interviews. But the model proved resilient. The world's first 24-hour news channel was up and running. And the old limits of time, of space, of what counted as news were gone. The newsroom's job was no longer to distill the day into a handful of essential stories. Now the mission was to fill every moment with something for someone at any hour. Cable news executives faced a new kind of math. Filling a half hour each night had once demanded tough choices and expensive reporting. Filling 24 hours a day demanded something else entirely: the cost of sending correspondents across the country or overseas, hiring camera crews, and producing in-depth investigative pieces quickly outpaced the financial logic of a channel that needed to keep viewers glued around the clock. Studio-based shows, debate panels, call-ins, and commentary offered a far cheaper solution. A single anchor, a handful of pundits, and a few producers could fill hour after hour without the expense of travel or original reporting. Guests were often unpaid, eager for exposure, or brought in via satellite at minimal cost. By the mid-1990s, these formats had become the backbone of cable news schedules. Programs like Crossfire on CNN and later The O'Reilly Factor on Fox News delivered lively debate and strong personalities at a fraction of the cost of a field report. The economics were hard to ignore. 1 hour of live studio talk could cost 1/10 of what it took to produce a fully reported segment from overseas. As channels competed for ratings, the incentive shifted. Engaged, Loyal viewers meant higher advertising rates and stronger leverage in carriage negotiations with cable providers. Where network news had once been a prestige project, a public service that justified its losses with reputation, cable news was now expected to deliver profits. The pressure to keep costs low and audiences high drove an explosion of opinion-driven programming. The tone of news changed, as financial rewards followed shows that kept viewers watching, reacting, and coming back for more. In the summer of 1987, a fundamental rule of American broadcasting disappeared almost overnight. For nearly 4 decades, the Fairness Doctrine had required every radio and television broadcaster using public airwaves to address controversial issues and to present contrasting viewpoints. The doctrine grew out of the idea that spectrum was limited, and those who held licenses owed a duty to the public interest. Enforcement was real. Stations risked complaints, hearings, even loss of their license if they aired one-sided coverage on issues of public importance. The Supreme Court had upheld this logic in the 1969 Red Lion case, affirming the FCC's authority to demand balanced reporting. By the mid-1980s, the landscape had changed. The FCC, now led by Reagan appointees, argued that the Fairness Doctrine had become a barrier to free speech. In a 1985 report, the Commission claimed that fear of complaints led broadcasters to avoid controversy altogether, chilling debate rather than enriching it. Cable television was expanding, and some commissioners insisted that the scarcity argument no longer held. On August 4, 1987, the FCC voted unanimously to abolish the doctrine, issuing an order that declared the Fairness Doctrine no longer served the public interest. The immediate effect was to erase the legal obligation for balance. Broadcasters could now air editorial commentary and opinion-driven programming without offering opposing views. Congress tried to reinstate the rule, but President Reagan vetoed the bill. The door was now open for talk radio and television to pursue ideological branding without fear of regulatory reprisal. Rush Limbaugh's national radio show launched just months later, building an audience by taking sides instead of splitting the difference. The Fairness Doctrine's repeal did not apply directly to cable, but its absence set a tone. News was no longer bound by formal expectations of balance. The legal green light for partisan programming had been given. Cable news did not just multiply the number of channels, it fractured the audience itself. The era of everyone watching the same anchor at dinner faded into a world where viewers could pick the news that matched their politics, their region, even their mood. By 2024, Pew Research found that 60% of Republicans named Fox News as their main source, while 54% of Democrats relied on CNN or MSNBC. Only about 1 in 5 partisans reported regularly watching news from the other side. The result? Millions of Americans now live in sharply divergent media environments, each with its own set of facts, priorities, and even language. Research from the Knight Foundation and Reuters Institute shows that over half of consistent partisans get their news almost exclusively from outlets that reinforce their worldview. The shared national conversation of the Cronkite era has splintered into echo chambers. This fragmentation is not just a matter of taste. It changes how stories are covered and how errors spread. In the rush to be first, speed often outruns caution. The 2000 presidential election offered a vivid example, but the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013 made the new dangers impossible to ignore. As breaking news unfolded, CNN reported that a suspect had been identified as Sunil Tripathi, a missing student, based on unconfirmed police scanner chatter. Fox News, eager not to be left behind, ran with another name, Mike Mulugeta, also innocent. Both reports were wrong. Corrections came hours later, but the damage was done. Tripathi's family endured a wave of online harassment, and the real suspects remained at large. A Columbia Journalism Review analysis found that the corrections received only a fraction of the airtime devoted to the initial false reports. The incentives that once rewarded accuracy, limited airtime, regulatory scrutiny, and the threat of losing a license have been replaced by a race for engagement and speed. Newsrooms now monitor real-time ratings and social media shares, knowing that a dramatic headline, even if wrong, can dominate the conversation. When mistakes happen, they echo through partisan silos and online feeds, often outlasting the truth. The trust that once came from shared facts and careful reporting is harder to find in a world built for speed and self-selection. Every minute of cable news is tracked, measured, and fed back into a system where attention is currency. In the early days, producers relied on Nielsen ratings and overnight shares. Now the numbers run deeper, with real-time dashboards tallying every click, every second someone lingers, every spike in social media mentions. The business model rewards whatever keeps viewers watching, clicking, or sharing. Not just the facts, but the feelings those facts provoke. Studies of engagement show that stories sparking anger or fear outperform calm analysis by wide margins. The more a headline triggers debate or outrage, the more likely it is to dominate the cycle, even if the substance is thin. Cable news executives and digital editors watch these numbers closely. The algorithms that sort what appears on screens are tuned to maximize engagement, not accuracy. If a segment drives a flood of reactions, positive or negative, it gains more airtime, more promotion, and more revenue. This feedback loop blurs the line between serving the public and feeding the machine. As the supply of news has exploded, so has the competition for attention. Channels and websites race to capture not just the largest audience, but the most loyal, most reactive audience. The cost is subtle but profound. When every story must compete for emotional impact, the measured, cautious approach of the network era slips out of reach. The paradox is clear in the numbers. Americans have more news available than at any point in history, delivered faster and in more formats than ever imagined. Yet Gallup and Pew trendlines reveal a steady decline in trust, even as the volume of coverage multiplies. More options have not produced more confidence. Instead, the relentless pursuit of engagement, driven by metrics and amplified by algorithms, has left many viewers doubting not just individual stories, but the very idea of a shared reality. The system, designed to reward attention, has made trust a casualty of abundance. Across the Atlantic and north of the border, a different model of news has endured. In the United Kingdom, the BBC remains the most trusted news brand, even as political winds shift. In Canada, CBC Radio Canada holds a similar place, funded by Parliament and bound by a public service mandate. Cross-national surveys tell a clear story. About 40% of Canadians and 36% of Britons say they trust the news most of the time, compared to just 32% of Americans. The gap grows wider when comparing trust in flagship public broadcasters to trust in commercial cable channels. The BBC and the CBC still command a broad, if aging, audience, and are seen as national institutions, not just media brands. Their charters require impartiality, and their funding is not tied to nightly ratings or online clicks. Editorial guidelines, ombudsman reviews, and public complaints processes are built into their systems. The result is a baseline of trust that, while imperfect and sometimes contested, has proven more resilient than in the US. For younger generations, though, the ground is shifting everywhere. In the United States, fewer than 1 in 5 adults under 30 say they often get news from television. Instead, about half of young adults rely on social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok for news updates. The pattern holds in the United Kingdom and Canada. Among those under 25, television bulletins are a minor source, with most news coming from algorithm-driven feeds, and video apps. The shared nightly ritual, the family gathered around a single broadcast, has faded into memory for anyone born after the 1990s. Instead, news arrives as a personalized stream, shaped by individual interests and digital habits. The contrast is sharp. Where older viewers in Canada and Britain still turn to the CBC or the BBC for a sense of national perspective, their younger counterparts experience news as fragmented and individualized. In the United States, the absence of a widely trusted national public broadcaster leaves the information landscape even more fractured. The promise of streaming and social media was more choice and more voices, but the cost has been the loss of a common news experience, especially for generations who never knew what it was like to watch the news together at the same time every night. Today, trust in news sits near historic lows, even as information multiplies. The shift from shared facts to fragmented feeds reshapes how Americans see truth and each other. Democracies depend on a common ground, but that ground keeps shrinking. The challenge now isn't access, but rebuilding credibility. In an age of endless voices, trust remains the rarest headline. Share your thoughts below. Does trust in news still matter to you?